June 1st, 1942. Beneath Pearl Harbor, in a dim basement filled with cigarette smoke and scattered code sheets, Commander Joseph Rochefort stares at a string of meaningless Japanese characters. Tokyo believes their naval cipher is unbreakable. Outside this cramped room, 6 carriers already lie on the ocean floor. Thousands of sailors are dead, and Japan holds a vast empire stretching 7 million square miles. If Rochefort fails to crack this code in the next 72 hours, the US Pacific Fleet will steam blind into the largest trap ever set at sea. And the Pacific War could end before America fires back. What happens in this basement over the next 3 days will change the entire course of World War II. Rochefort doesn't look like a warrior. He's 42 years old, exhausted, wearing a smoking jacket and slippers because he hasn't left this basement in days. His team, linguists, mathematicians, chess champions pulled from universities, works around the clock in what they call Station HYPO, officially the Combat Intelligence Unit. Their enemy isn't bullets or bombs, it's JN-25, the Japanese Navy's main operational cipher, a code Tokyo designed to be mathematically unbreakable. Here's how JN-25 works. Every word, every number, every naval term gets converted into a 5-digit code group pulled from a codebook containing thousands of entries. Then each group gets scrambled by adding another 5-digit number from a separate additive table. The result looks like random noise. 38651 72984 41237, strings of numbers that mean absolutely nothing unless you possess both the codebook and the additive table. Japan rotates these tables regularly, forcing Rochefort's team to start over every few weeks. Breaking a single message might require analyzing hundreds of intercepts and cross-referencing patterns. Only then could guesses be tested against new traffic. It's intellectual combat, waged one number at a time. By May 1942, Rochefort's team has partially broken JN-25. They can read perhaps 15 to 20% of intercepted messages. Enough to catch fragments, enough to see patterns, but not enough to read complete operational orders. What they're seeing in late May terrifies them. Japanese naval radio traffic is spiking, multiple carrier groups are moving. Fuel tenders, supply ships, troop transports, all converging towards something big. The intercepts mention a target designated by 2 letters, AF. But where is AF? Rochefort believes it's Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of coral and sand 1,400 miles northwest of Hawaii. Midway isn't much, 2 small islands, an airstrip, a few hundred Marines. But it's America's forward outpost, the last defensive barrier before Hawaii itself. If Japan takes Midway, they can threaten the Hawaiian Islands directly, force the US fleet into a decisive battle on Japanese terms, and potentially knock America out of the Pacific War entirely. Other intelligence officers disagree. Some think AF means the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Others suggest it could be Fiji, Samoa, even Hawaii itself. Without proof, Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, cannot commit his remaining carriers to defend one location. America has only 3 operational carriers left in the Pacific: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, which is still being frantically repaired after the Battle of the Coral Sea. Japan has at least 6 fleet carriers, battle-hardened air crews, and an unbroken string of victories stretching back to Pearl Harbor. Let's be clear about the stakes. By mid-1942, Japan had sunk or crippled 8 Allied battleships, destroyed more than 400 aircraft, and conquered the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. Losing Midway wouldn't just mean losing an island. It would open the door to Hawaii, potentially force the US Pacific Fleet to retreat to the American West Coast, and give Japan complete control of the Central Pacific for years to come. The entire strategic balance hangs on whether Rochefort can prove where AF really is. But how could one basement in Hawaii, staffed by exhausted linguists and mathematicians, hope to outthink an empire that stretched from Burma to the Gilbert Islands? Doubt was spreading. Without undeniable proof, Nimitz would never gamble the fleet. Rochefort had one chance to deliver it. Rochefort knows he needs proof, something so clear, so undeniable, that Nimitz will bet the fleet on it. So he devises a trick, a piece of operational deception so simple it borders on genius. He tells Midway's commander via secure undersea cable to send an uncoded radio message reporting that their water distillation plant has broken down. The message goes out on May 20th. Midway is short of fresh water. Now Rochefort waits. If AF really is Midway, Japanese intelligence will intercept that message, encode it into JN-25, and relay it up their chain of command. Hours feel like days. His team monitors every Japanese transmission, watching for any reference to water shortages. And then it happens. On May 22nd, Station HYPO intercepts a coded Japanese message. When Rochefort's team breaks it, the message reads, AF is short of water. There it is. Proof. AF equals Midway. Rochefort takes his findings to Admiral Nimitz. The conversation is tense. Nimitz is a careful, methodical leader, not given to wild gambles. But he also understands what's at stake. If Rochefort is right, America can position its carriers northeast of Midway, hidden beyond Japanese search range, and ambush Japan's strike force as it approaches. If Rochefort is wrong, the US fleet will be out of position, vulnerable, possibly wiped out in a single engagement. Nimitz makes the call. He will gamble the Pacific Fleet on intelligence from a basement code-breaking unit. If you're still watching and finding this story as gripping as we do, please comment below to let us know you're here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support helps us continue creating content that brings history to life. The pieces start moving. Enterprise and Hornet steam out of Pearl Harbor on May 28th. Yorktown, still under repair with welders working around the clock, follows 2 days later with hull plates barely sealed. The three carriers rendezvous at a position called Point Luck, 200 miles northeast of Midway, and wait. Nimitz has given his task force commanders explicit orders. Remain undetected, do not transmit radio signals, let the Japanese come to you. Everything depends on surprise. Everything depends on Rochefort being right. Meanwhile, Japan's strike force is already at sea. 6 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, the most powerful naval aviation force ever assembled, sail east under the command of Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. These are the same carriers that struck Pearl Harbor. Their pilots are veterans, many with hundreds of combat hours. Japan's plan is straightforward: bomb Midway into submission, draw out the American carriers, and destroy them in a decisive surface engagement. Japanese intelligence believes the US has at most 2 carriers in the area, possibly only 1. They have no idea 3 American carriers are already lying in wait. But here's the deeper truth. What Rochefort proved in that basement wasn't just the location of an enemy target. He shattered the assumption that intelligence was secondary to firepower, that wars were won by battleships and bombs alone. For the first time in the Pacific War, America was fighting with information as a weapon, seeing the enemy's moves before the enemy made them, turning Japan's own operational security against them. And yet, even perfect intelligence means nothing without someone willing to act on it, willing to fly into the teeth of the enemy and turn knowledge into fire. How would young American pilots, many on their first combat mission, perform against Japan's best? June 4, 1942. Dawn breaks over the Pacific. At 0430 hours, Japanese carrier aircraft launched their first strike against Midway. 36 Nakajima B-5N bombers, 36 Aichi D-3A dive bombers, 36 Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters. They hit Midway's airfield hard, devastating the base, cratering runways, destroying fuel tanks, and silencing marine gun positions. But Midway's aircraft have already scrambled. Torpedo bombers, dive bombers, even obsolete Buffalo fighters, everything that can fly, launches to attack the Japanese carriers. It's a slaughter. The first wave of American attackers, flying slow, unescorted torpedo bombers, gets cut to pieces by Japanese Zeros and anti-aircraft fire. Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet, 15 aircraft, presses its attack at wave-top level, trying to get close enough to drop torpedoes. Zero fighters swarm them, only 1 man survives. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise loses 10 of 14 aircraft. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown loses 10 of 12. Within an hour, 41 American aircraft had vanished into the sea, every crewman gone, and still not a single torpedo struck home. But what if those doomed attacks were never about hitting carriers at all? What if their sacrifice set the stage for something no one expected? Those torpedo attacks accomplish something crucial. They pull Japanese combat air patrol down to sea level, chasing slow-moving torpedo bombers, leaving the high-altitude space above the carriers temporarily undefended. And at that exact moment, American dive bombers arrive. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading Enterprise's dive bomber squadrons, has been searching for the Japanese fleet for over an hour, burning fuel, approaching the point where he'll have to turn back or risk running dry. Then he spots a Japanese destroyer racing northeast, leaving a white wake across the blue Pacific. McCluskey makes a gamble. He follows that wake. At 10:20 hours, he sees them. 4 Japanese carriers in a tight formation, decks crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed for a second strike. McCluskey doesn't hesitate. He rolls his SBD Dauntless dive bomber into a 70-degree dive, pushing the nose down, accelerating toward terminal velocity. Behind him, 33 more dive bombers follow. They scream down through 12,000 feet of open sky. Japanese lookouts spot them, but it's too late. Anti-aircraft guns open fire, black puffs of flak bursting around the diving bombers. But there's no time to turn the carriers, no time to scramble more fighters, no time to do anything but watch. The first bomb hits Akagi, Japan's flagship, penetrating the flight deck and detonating in the hangar bay, where armed aircraft are being fueled. Aviation gas ignites, torpedoes cook off. Within seconds, the hangar becomes an inferno. A second bomb hits Kaga, ripping through the deck, triggering secondary explosions. Another hits Soryu. In less than 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 6 fleet carriers are blazing wrecks, listing out of control, their crews abandoning ship. Let's pause and understand what just happened. Rochefort's team gave Nimitz the location. Nimitz gave McCluskey the position. McCluskey made the final call, following that lone destroyer rolling into that dive. Without any one of those decisions, Midway would have been lost. But here's what narratives often miss. Even the best intelligence in the world means nothing if the pilot can't execute under fire. Remember this, without Rochefort's pencil marks in that Pearl Harbor basement, every one of these young pilots would have been searching blind, burning fuel, finding nothing. And without pilots willing to push their dive bombers through walls of flak, Rochefort's intelligence would have been just paper. This was not luck. This was brains and bravery fused together in fire. The battle isn't over. Hiryu, the 4th Japanese carrier, launches a counterattack. Her dive bombers find Yorktown and hit her with 3 bombs, then torpedo bombers put 2 torpedoes into her hull. Yorktown lists heavily, her crew abandons ship, and she's later sunk by a Japanese submarine. America loses 1 carrier, Japan loses 4, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu all sink or are scuttled by day's end. Let's talk about the price. Torpedo Squadron 8. 15 men flew out, 1 came back. Torpedo Squadron 6. 14 launched, 4 returned. Torpedo Squadron 3. 12 went in, 2 survived. Overall, American forces lost 147 aircraft and 307 men. Many of these pilots were flying their first combat mission. They pressed attacks knowing the odds were against them, knowing Japanese Zeros were faster and more maneuverable, knowing their torpedoes often failed to detonate even when they hit. Courage doesn't guarantee survival, but at Midway it bought time. Time for the dive bombers to arrive, time for McCluskey to follow that destroyer's wake, time to turn intelligence into victory. Here's the question most documentaries avoid. Were American pilots truly inferior to Japan's veterans? Or were they simply flying at a technological and tactical disadvantage that made heroism their only option? Midway marks the turning point in the Pacific War. After June 4, 1942, Japan never regains the strategic initiative. They lose 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers in a single day. Not just ships, but experienced air crews, maintenance personnel, operational expertise built over years. America, meanwhile, learns that intelligence can level the battlefield. that knowing where the enemy will be transforms defense into ambush. The psychological impact reverberates across both fleets. Japanese confidence, unshaken since Pearl Harbor, cracks. American morale, battered by 6 months of defeats, surges. But here's what's rarely discussed: the double standard in how this victory was explained. When Japan won at Pearl Harbor, at Wake Island, at the Philippines, analysts called it superior tactics, better training, brilliant execution. When America won at Midway, the narrative shifted. Suddenly, it was all about industrial capacity, about America's ability to outproduce Japan, about inevitable resource advantages. That framing erases skill, intelligence, and courage from the equation entirely. Yes, America's industrial base mattered. Eventually, shipyards in Newport News and San Francisco would launch carriers faster than Japan could sink them. But at Midway in June 1942, America did not have industrial superiority. The US Pacific Fleet had 3 carriers. Japan had 6. American torpedoes were defective, frequently failing to explode. Japanese Zeros outperformed American fighters in speed, climb rate, and maneuverability. If industrial advantage alone determined outcomes, Japan should have won Midway decisively. What changed the equation was intelligence. Rochefort's team gave Nimitz something no factory could produce: perfect knowledge of enemy intentions. That knowledge allowed 3 American carriers to position themselves precisely where Japan didn't expect them. It transformed a defensive battle into an offensive ambush. And when the moment came, American pilots, flying inferior aircraft, armed with unreliable weapons, pressed attacks with a ferocity that matched anything Japan's veterans could deliver. The irony cuts deep. For decades after the war, official US Navy histories barely mentioned Rochefort's contribution. Intelligence victories were classified, buried under secrecy protocols, erased from public narratives. Rochefort himself was passed over for promotion, denied the Distinguished Service Medal recommended by Nimitz, and eventually reassigned away from code-breaking. Why? Because intelligence work doesn't fit traditional military glory. There are no uniforms in the photographs, no medals pinned in ceremonies, no clear lines between individual effort and collective success. A dive bomber pilot gets credited with sinking a carrier. A codebreaker who made that pilot's success possible gets a footnote, if that. It wasn't until 1985, 4 years after Rochefort's death, that President Ronald Reagan posthumously awarded him the Distinguished Service Medal. By then, the Midway narrative had already solidified. Brave pilots, heroic admirals, American factories. The man in the basement with a pencil had been written out of his own victory. What would the Pacific War have looked like if Rochefort had failed to break JN-25, if Nimitz had guessed wrong, if McCluskey had turned back before spotting that destroyer? The broader lesson extends beyond one battle. Midway demonstrates that modern warfare rewards the side that integrates intelligence, technology, and human judgment most effectively. Rochefort's code-breaking meant nothing without Nimitz's willingness to act on it. Nimitz's positioning meant nothing without McCluskey's airmanship. McCluskey's attack meant nothing without pilots brave enough to dive through flak. Remove any single element, intelligence, leadership, or courage, and the outcome flips. This reveals something critical about how wars are actually won. We love simple narratives: the genius admiral, the heroic pilot, the unstoppable factory. But Midway was won by a system: intelligence flowing to decision-makers trusting intelligence, operators executing with skill. That system, working in concert, turned a potential disaster into a decisive victory. American military competence in 1942 is often downplayed, treated as a learning curve, a work in progress that only succeeded later when overwhelming resources kicked in. But Midway reveals something different. McCluskey made the right call following that destroyer. The dive bomber pilots executed near-perfect attacks under brutal conditions. Nimitz positioned his fleet flawlessly based on incomplete information. These weren't lucky amateurs stumbling into victory. They were professionals making high-stakes decisions under pressure and getting them right. Compare that to Japanese mistakes at Midway. Nagumo kept half his strike force armed for ship attack, half for land attack, then switched armaments mid-operation, leaving his hangar decks crowded with bombs and fuel. Japanese reconnaissance failed to spot American carriers until too late. Their combat air patrol got pulled out of position, chasing torpedo bombers. These weren't the actions of an invincible force, they were errors, understandable errors under combat stress, but errors nonetheless. There's also a deeper point about how we remember wars. We celebrate visible heroism, the man in the cockpit, the general on the hill. We struggle with collective, invisible victories. Rochefort's team worked in anonymity, their success measured in decoded messages nobody outside intelligence circles would ever read. Their work didn't produce dramatic photographs or newsreel footage. It produced spreadsheets, code tables, probability assessments. That kind of victory doesn't sell war bonds or inspire recruiting posters. So it gets minimized, classified, eventually forgotten. The truth is this simple. Without a man in Hawaii with a pencil, and without a man in a cockpit willing to dive through fire, Midway would have been lost. One gave America eyes, the other gave America teeth. Together, they changed the war. Neither could have done it alone. So here's the debate we want you to join. What really won Midway? Was it Detroit's factories churning out ships and planes? Or was it Rochefort's basement in Pearl Harbor, cracking codes with pencil and paper? Did America win the Pacific because of industrial muscle, or because intelligence and courage mattered just as much, maybe more? And here's the uncomfortable follow-up. Why do we remember the pilots but forget the codebreakers? Why does history celebrate visible heroism and bury invisible genius? Is it because intelligence work doesn't fit our idea of glory, or because admitting how much we depend on brains instead of brawn makes us uncomfortable? Comment below. We want your thoughts, especially if you disagree. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and share one thing you already knew about this story, or one thing that surprised you. Your thoughts are important to us, so don't hesitate to share them. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.